Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you today. My connection to Charles Gontier is both professional and very personal. But as Professor Cornelia Seger said at the beginning, today we want to celebrate the legacy. And I'd like to take you on a journey to an area of law which I'm assuming not very many of you in the room will be very familiar with. It echoes what Duncan sort of introduced, namely the social dimension of sustainable development and how it's reflected in the constitutional order of the European Union. So after a brief introduction, I will talk about the European Constitution, solidarity in the EU constitutional order, sustainable development, and then bring those fields together in some brief conclusions. Justice Gontier was ahead of his time when he combined fraternity with the idea of sustainable development, because that emphasized the social dimension, as did the Johannesburg Summit on Sustainable Development in 2002. Justice Gontier said, the concept underlines the importance of environmental values and a spirit of solidarity, or as he put forward in his Montreal speech, fraternity, being reminded of Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reasons and conscience, and should act towards one another in the spirit of brotherhood. Solidarity first occurred in the 1804 Code Civil in France. And of course, it's strongly associated with the notion of fraternity. I would like to sort of underline this connection, and I'm sure there would be theoretical papers that we will hear during the course of this conference. But for me, the notion of solidarity is actually quite an important element of fraternity. Solidarity and sustainable development are part of how European society works and how Europe engages with the rest of the world, said the European Commission in 2008. So thus, we shouldn't be surprised if our European counterparts are demanding language which reflects solidarity with it and towards the world and on sustainable development. But first, let me introduce you, and as Jean Monnet Chair, that's actually one of my mandates, to this somewhat alien, somewhat foreign legal order that is the European Union. The European Court of Justice already declared the founding treaties of the European Union a constitutional charter in its judgment in Le Ver in 1988. La charte constitutionnelle de base c'est le traité. Renewed constitutional discussion occurred then in the 1992 Maastricht Treaty, when in its preamble it declared the European Union to be une union sans cesse plus entre les peuples de l'Europe, echoing somewhat the Declaration of Independence and the US Constitution. But it went further than that. There were calls for a proper EU constitution in May, for example, of the year 2000, when Foreign Minister Fischer gave his famous Humboldt speech. And it led, and a parallel development was the adoption of the Nice Charter of Fundamental Rights in December 2000. That led to a constitutional convention, a treaty establishing the Constitution for Europe, the unfortunate rejection of that project, and then after a reflection period, the Reform Treaty adopted as Treaty of Lisbon in 2008, which entered into force in 2009. And that, if we see the European Union as a constitutional order, then it's interesting to reflect on the position that solidarity plays and has within that constitutional order. I don't want to encroach on my colleague's presentation, so I will keep my remarks brief on this point, because there are multiple references to solidarity in the EU treaties. That is, the Treaty on the European Union and the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. For example, solidarity between the sexes, Article 2. Solidarity between generations and between member states, Article 3.3. Solidarity among peoples in the preamble in Article 3.5. There's a new solidarity clause in Article 222, where it says the Union and its member states shall act jointly in the spirit of solidarity if a member state is the object of a terrorist attack or victim of a natural or man-made disaster. There are also strong references to solidarity, especially economic solidarity, in the recent case law, for example, on citizenship in the Vida case. There's an entire chapter on solidarity in the Charter of Fundamental Rights, and there's a reference to solidarity in the preamble. Conscious of its spiritual and moral heritage, the Union is founded on the indivisible, universal values of human dignity, freedom, equality, and solidarity. Article 37 then makes the connection that I want to introduce here as well, that under the title of solidarity, we have a provision in the Human Rights Charter on environmental protection. A high level of environmental protection and the improvement of the quality of the environment must be integrated into the policy of the Union in accordance with the principle of sustainable development, or I would say the objective of sustainable development. And what's the purpose of sustainable development? It was introduced as an objective in the community in the Treaty of Amsterdam in the 1990s, Article 2 of the European Communities Treaty. And then in the EU's 2002 Council decision, A Strategy for Sustainable Development, the well-known Brundtland definition for sustainable development was adopted. Development that meets the needs of present generations without compromising the needs of future generations. In Article 3.3 of the Lisbon Treaty, Lisbon version of the EU Treaty, there's a clear three-pillar approach, where member states agree that the EU shall work for sustainable development of Europe based on a balanced economic growth, a high competitive social market economy aiming at full employment and social progress, and a high level of protection and improvement of the quality of the environment. And also in Article 21.2, where the Union shall define and pursue common policies and actions in its foreign policy to foster the sustainable economic, social, and environmental development of developing countries with the primary aim of eradicating poverty, and under letter F, help develop international measures to preserve and improve the quality of the environment. Article 11 then reminds us that environmental protection requirements must be integrated in the implementation of UN policies, in particular with a view of promoting sustainable development. And Article 20, Article 191 in Title 20 says, the Union policy on the environment shall contribute to the pursuit of the objectives such as preserving the quality of the environment, prudent and rational utilization of natural resources, and promoting measures at the international level, for example, combating climate change. I should mention that we haven't yet seen the kind of constitutional jurisprudence on sustainable development or solidarity, for that matter, that one might expect. But these provisions are fairly young. We can see the first arguments being made in cases such as first corporate shipping or in Viking Laval. The trade unions argued that the liberty to establish in another member state should be curtailed by considerations for sustainable development, and in particular the social dimension, that is equality of workers and their pay in the different member states. The Court of Justice hasn't yet based its decision on sustainable development, specifically has made reference to the objective of sustainable development in its Cartagena Protocol opinion or the Small Arms judgment, where it said the Union specifically has the competence to act for sustainable development in developing countries. So what are some of the conclusions? In the interest of time, I've kept this presentation rather brief, but I think it's fair to conclude the following. Solidarity is not limited to solidarity between the Union and the member states, or between member states, or between EU citizens. Rather, it extends to solidarity with other parts of the world. There are close links between these two fundamental, or some might call them interstitial, norms of solidarity and sustainable development. Sustainable development, properly understood, requires solidarity between generations and within generations. And both sustainable development and solidarity require environmental protection, social cohesion, and economic fairness. The EU constitutional order is thus based on these norms and has developed closely defined principles to realize them. And I would encourage you all to study the European Union as a constitutional order and the role that solidarity, fraternity, one might say, and sustainable development plays within it. Thank you.